So we're going to talk a little bit about Pinkberry, if that's okay. So when you first got to Pinkberry, they were in 2 countries. And during your time there, you not only saw them through an acquisition, but you helped get them into 25 at the end?
Yeah,
is what they were at?
I mean, I think everyone, how many people know what Pinkberry is? Okay, almost everyone. So those who don't know, it's a frozen yogurt chain. When I started there, most people don't know, the VC that owned the company is called Mavron, based out of Seattle, Howard Schultz's VC. And so I had always worked for publicly traded companies. And when they recruited me to come out here, and they said we had this vision about taking this chain global, this is a global thing, I kind of had to laugh initially because it was frozen yogurt. And I remember to this day, to answer this question, that how hard I interviewed the managing partner. I was so bold to say, well, why do you think this works? Are you going to hold standards? Like, this is not for the, this is not for the faint of heart to really grow this thing. And to this day, I have to give a lot of respect to the board and to obviously the VC to wanting to grow it the right way. And so when I started, yeah, we had 95 stores in 2 countries. Sounds like a lot, but it was really all over the place. It was kind of dispersed, and I don't want to say not formulate strategy, but because when things are so hot, everybody kind of wants to do everything, right? Hey, successful, nothing's going to go wrong, let's doing it. That's when you get into trouble. Got to have a really strategic plan. And I think that's where it said, okay, where do you want to grow? Let's just not go to every market. And again, we didn't have the resources to go, hey, I want to open in 10 countries each year. That's not possible. So one of the things I found with Pinkberry was the love of the experience. And how do you replicate that everywhere? And to take it to the acquisition, when we sold it a year and a half ago to 25 countries, the journey that I look at, it's funny because we see all the numbers and everyone's great, but man, the hard work, I obviously had a great team. The hard work to get to there was probably the most satisfying, and I tell you why. So for the first 3 countries, opened in the Middle East, we partnered with Al-Shaya, ended up having over 70 stores in the MENA region, and really strategically placed where we wanted to go, and really having to partner with putting a strategy together on why we want to do things. And I oversaw obviously business development and strategy and supply chain and finance at the end of this whole thing. And where do you go from there? And what I found out was what worked in the US, and even with the team around, everyone wanted to do the same thing. You can't do that, obviously, we know that, but we were not locally sourcing, we were shipping a lot of things overseas, we were trying to copy a model that was probably not an ROI friendly, and if you want to grow in any region, you wanted to do that. But it was about locally sourcing. And again, think about this was like 7 years ago almost. And you talk about locally sourcing a product, it's really, really hard to do. And so I think one of the biggest changes that I saw with Pinkberry was when we got out of the these things that we call compromising values. We figured out really quickly in the beginning what was really compromising values. Was it the floor? Like you could, I remember to this day, well, we can't change the floor. That's what Pinkberry's all about. No offense, I came from scaling companies. You have to really ask yourself, is that really what that is? And in this room right now, everyone thinks, oh, that's easy. Of course you can change the floor. I would do it in a heartbeat. But when you're actually inside a company and you think that your success has led you to all these elements, it's really hard to make those decisions. And I think where I'm really proud is deciding what items were compromised items and what was not, and sticking to that wherever we were going globally.
And can you share a couple of
Yeah, sure. I think one of the initial things was obviously the way it looked, the profile. So everyone had initially said, well, we had to keep the same flavors. Where we're going, we don't create new flavors for new places. Fair and not fair, right? We opened Peru. We had 20 stores in Peru, Lima, not all of Peru, Lima, and we had a flavor called lucuma that was a local fruit. Well, that wasn't created from the U.S. If you wanted it to be wanted to be their local store, you had to have some of these local items. So again, when you're starting up, it's really hard to build out local products. But once you get a good cadence on, okay, let's build passion fruit in in the Middle East. Let's do green tea in Japan, which was different palate-wise from the US. And I get to say I was really proud of that because I fought for that. It was a little bit not tart. And then in India, we did green apple. And yes, I'm Indian, and yes, I don't understand why we did that. but the locals wanted it. That's why we did it. I know why we did it. I can't explain it. You would go to all those places. Green apple was a popular flavor, and I went back and said we have to have this flavor, and the R&D team goes, what? Green apple. So I think that was one, obviously, and then toppings. But I think the way the layout looked, we had to evolutionize. The footprint had to be flexible, and because of global, we took those learnings and added it to the U.S. as well.
So did the floor change? I just have to ask.
Yeah, it did.
Oh, it did. Okay.
Yeah,
good.
it's too hard. It's too hard to clean when you have that much footfall.
When you're looking at all these different countries and locally sourcing, which were the more difficult countries to get into?
Yeah, I think the challenging one happened to be my own home country in India. I think we got to a point where when we got to the 20, to the 15, 16 countries, it was when I first got there, it took us a year to get a deal signed to actually get into market. At the end of it, we were able to get a deal signed, like in Chile, Santiago, we opened in 3 months, which was the fastest we've ever done it. No one thought that we could do it because we streamlined the whole process of what we were looking from locally. India was the hardest probably for us because we are still importing one product, and that's the powder, which makes Pinkberry, and they were giving us a tariff, and they were taxing us as a milk product. And that would really, it was like double percent. So it's really, really hard to do that. And I think Japan, which was finding the right partner in Japan, because we really wanted to have, we waited about 2 years. I had the board on my neck wanting to say, hey, let's do Japan. But I think Japan was a market that we wanted to enter at the right time, right moment, and we partnered with the World Group, which is a publicly traded company on the Tokyo Stock Exchange, and they opened in Osaka, Tokyo, Fukuoka, so we ended up successfully doing that.
And when you were creating the strategy and order of how you were going to enter each country, what were some of the considerations and where did you start? Yeah,
it's as simple as it can be. Everyone, you have a whiteboard and everybody wants to go, let's go China, let's go to this, let's go to these places. We actually never did enter China. And you took up risks and benefits out of what do you want to do and what is the resources they have. And I thought the Middle East made sense, so we had a lot of success. Let's kind of create and keep building that. Latin America made a lot of sense. So we went from Peru, Lima, to Santiago, to Dominican, to Panama, to, at the time, Venezuela, and Puerto Rico. So we had some success that, we had a model that we can kind of focus our supply chain, even though I wanted to get to Asia really fast, but it had to come in time, right? You couldn't just, we knew what it had to take to launch. So then we did obviously open Asia we did have India, and we did have Thailand, and then Japan at the same time. And you have to be a little bit nimble with the strategy. You've got all the wants that you want, and you also want to see the ease of doing business. You also want to see, what's really competitive in the landscape right now, and can you make it the brand that is local?
I'm actually curious too, is a moment where, or one of the biggest pivots that you had to make, and or one of the most shocking, response to entering a country?
I don't know if it was shocking, but I think in this room I saw a lot of hands who knew Pinkberry. We just had this conversation in the back, how everyone knows what Pinkberry is. I actually never assumed that because people actually don't know what it is. So we look at Pinkberry, people thought it was a retail women's clothing line. People thought it was, I had to explain that, by the way, to ET one day because no one believed me. I had to show the picture why they thought it was a women's clothing line. But I think internationally we had to add some things that we wouldn't do, like add frozen yogurt. Even though we were a brand that was more than that, but we had to be very clear. Again, very simple, but again, a little bit different from what we had did in the US. And same thing, it's no different what Starbucks does in other places where they do put Starbucks coffee.
Right.
I think the UK was interesting too. We opened the UK, really had great top line. One of the partners had to go, they had other businesses that went out, and so keeping 3 Pinkberries and those places had to close. And so, but we did come right back into the market with another partner that, again, because it was easier to sell because we had a successful 3 stores. I thought that was interesting for me because, you got a failure, but it kind of didn't fail, kind of, and then you had to go back into it. So we were in Stratford Mall, down in Selfridges, and that was interesting as well.
You were actually talking in the back a little bit about a location that didn't really work out. And were there locations or the style of locations that were similar across the board in any country, like things we should look for when opening a store?
That's actually a great question. When we look at Turkey, for example, we attacked that a little bit differently. We had to open it with a flagship store kind of feel because we felt we needed to do it. But then we realized that wasn't the way that we wanted to enter that market. So we created a kiosk model to Turkey, and we ended up going from 2 stores to 15 stores within like that. And that model worked really, really great. And then we're like, wait a minute, why can't we take this and put it in other places in MENA around the world? And in some places it was a mix and match. Some places we had hardly in any airports when I started. We had now 20 airports. Take advantage of what your competitive strategy was. And because we weren't self-serve yogurt, we can go into places that we actually got ourselves into SAP's headquarters where employees could be able to have Pinkberry, and that was another model into wholesaling. So really being able to look at this as more than just one dimensional, and then taking that dimension and adding it to, specifically the international market where, you look at Kuwait, we had a delivery model in some of the places before, now everyone has a delivery model because of all the delivery companies that are out there. But it's interesting how we're learning a lot from international markets.
And is there anything you learned from international markets that you applied to the U.S.?
I think I'm a big believer, and those who've seen me, I believe that globalization and the global consumer is really sophisticated. I really believe that they are trendsetters. I don't know why that they get a bad rap in a lot of these countries that they are, but you see things that are working in different places, like say for Pinkberry specific model or kind of a taste or a topping. And you go, oh wow, this is kind of cool. Like right now in DC, salted caramel was like a hot selling item, but it wasn't everywhere else. And please don't ask me why. Maybe the people in the room who are from DC could tell me, but it was always skewed higher. And then we always knew, well, if we had anything that was that kind of palate, we're gonna make sure they get it first. And it's no different that you would do it internationally in country like passion fruit in the Middle East. You kind of go, anything that has that kind of fruit flavor, we're going to test it there, and if it works, let's see if we can try to test it here in the U.S. and in certain neighborhoods, not in all neighborhoods, but in certain neighborhoods to see if it tastes. And we also did Greek yogurt for a while, Greek smoothies, and which Greek yogurt isn't new to Europe. And also learning, should we be rolling that out internationally or not, which we didn't actually. Except in the U.S., it was very popular.
And before the acquisition, because you went through all of this and the different markets, when did you realize you were going to move on to something big? When did you know Pinkberry was?
Well, I think we had there was offers on the table. Obviously, when the group that bought us was Kahala, and then they sold it themselves, I kind of knew at that point that it was a straight. We had a good 5-year run. I think we left it in where we could do. I think internationally they still have a lot room to run, but for me to be able to sit on other people's boards and now to have a platform to share the things I can share now is great. I am going to take a few minutes. I think like diversity and gender equality to me are really important, and having you guys in this room and those are leaders that are here, don't take for granted, especially being inclusive and even gender equality. Those who are starting businesses or have businesses or consultants from NGOs to governments. I've spoken at other places too in government perspective. It's not just it is the right thing to do. We are one global community. We are a society. Businesses do have a voice, cannot be quiet, and you have an influence to be able to do it. So no matter what your role is, I feel like you must have an equality for everyone to be able to be successful. I really do believe that, and if you don't want to believe me that gender equality is important, you can just look at the bottom line. In cases, matter of fact, it is. So I think again, I just want to share that message with you all because I feel like you guys are influencers in the community, especially when it comes to global, right? If global can do it as an overall, you can definitely do it at a small scale if it's Los Angeles to somewhere else. Small companies, big companies always look at what everyone else is doing internationally. I don't want to say copying it, but they're always interested and intrigued, and we'll take those learnings from other places. So I've seen that personally. I've obviously sit on a B Corp as well, and I know you can be socially responsible at the same time and still make money.
I mean, I think actually I watched your NASDAQ interview where you spoke about this a little bit. And you also talked about a little bit about, maybe this would be helpful to everyone, what you look for in companies that you represent or that you work with as when it comes to social responsibility.
Yeah, you know, the NASDAQ thing you mentioned, to go on live and on a show that is pretty much trade talks and talk about publicly traded companies and social responsibility. You can imagine that probably isn't the topic that they cover all the time, options and those things. And I love that they asked me for that. That means that there's a trend setting. The trend is changing. And what I like to see is genuine. What do I mean by that? Like, I understand companies write checks, and they want to. Doesn't mean that yes, you're putting money and you're saying social responsibility, but back to the consumers, what are you actually doing in the community? Is your CEO in the community? I don't want to see photo ops. I want the community to know, is that my store? Because at the end of the day, you're serving the consumer. If the consumer can believe that's their product, their brand, that they are doing the right thing, you have them no matter, even if you go through crisis, because you built a goodwill. So especially on social responsibility, is it a mission that they're putting money in or a cause to their core? One. Two, are they really focusing on trending things, or is it not, are they just looking for PR? Which, again, you can argue and say, yeah, they're doing it because they are wanting to say they give back, but you look at companies that really are doing this really well. It's really tied to a mission, maybe it's children's, to women's rights, or to something that where it is very genuine about why they're doing it. And I think that's what we're going to see more of versus just writing a check.
And even if you go into a global markets, like how do you shift at a local level? Because gender equality is very different in states as it is in different countries. I mean, so. I'm gonna laugh when I'm gonna tell you. Like even in other countries where, like in Thailand is a good example where I met the Bangkok Mall's group, and many of the leaders were women. And I actually asked the question, and they knew that I had I'm a supporter of this, and they're like, "No, we really believe in this." So you can argue that the minority of folks are trying to focus on this, but it is the minority of folks who are pushing this will make the most impact. And there's always a social cause that could be done that's local. It doesn't need to be that everyone understands what it means at other states, but it really means how can you make a difference in the community? And I think, like I said, the goodness, and with social media now, you can't fake it. You will get called out if you don't do it the right way. And you let the people say it for you. Right. And I believe this is our last question. But for people who are moving into maybe a situation that you are in, you have to take this company global, or you're thinking about taking a company global. What are some things that have changed that you see as a bigger problem today that maybe weren't when you were starting?
Well, definitely, to answer real quickly, everyone says do your homework, but I wish we had all the time in the world to do homework and spend time, but you don't. You're going to have to make a decision. And the decision behind that is understanding, not just with government officials, but understanding what's currently there, what hasn't gone successfully, not just in your industry. I'm talking about other industries that are not affiliated to you. Why did they close? Why did they open? What was the issue? Because you can learn a lot. Even find comparable sales to different regions. Again, not also in your industry. I've learned a lot from that. Well, why is this building empty? Oh yeah, the locals know that every business that's been in there has been closed every year. Someone's laughing, I hear it, but and that's true. Are you going to open it then? Absolutely not. But you would never know that if you didn't really kind of focus on different things. And I think the last thing I'll leave this to, build good people. Build people around you that you trust. Empower your folks to give you real feedback, both locally and on your team. You can't do it yourself, but if you can empower your team, you will have the best ability to make the best decision that you can make at that point. It can never be perfect, but that'll be it.
Oh, that's great. And we're out of time, but it was great speaking with you.
Well, before I forget, I have to say, if you don't know who Cynthia Johnson is, she is top 15 ranked by LinkedIn, and she's going to tell me to stop, and Twitter, top 15 digital influencers in the world. About 1.4 million followers on Twitter. Wait, I say about gender equality, nobody claps, but then I get 1.4 Twitter million followers, everyone's clapping? What is wrong with you? No, I'm kidding. But no, she's very impressive, and I would be remiss not to say that.
Well, I'm so excited to have been on stage with you, and I would love it if you could tell everyone how to get in touch with you, both on Twitter and website they can find.
I don't have
some
that
of your
many
interviews,
followers like her, but
also RyanPatelSpeaks.com and at RyanPatelGlobal. So, thanks, guys.